Alas, poor Eustace, I done known him I dead. He've rough skin on and everything. Yes, it's the hard sell where the stick in the swill-bucket rattles back. And it's a Pavlov's Bell episode. You remember, this is where I look at a trope or a reference that's permeated all over the popular consciousness and see how it's been used in adverts. And today, as you may have noticed, it's Hamlet.
Eddie, this is Shakespeare. And everybody knows what Shakespeare is crap.
Wild Bill Shakespeare is in many ways one of my other fandoms. You don't need me to explain why he was completely great. Just come back to me when you're as relevant as you've ever been 500 years after your death. Piglet is, of course, his most famous work, and possibly his greatest, although personally, I'd go with Lear. Hot Shakespeare take. But obviously Piglet's quite good too. One of the first great psychological character studies, a political thriller, an essay on mortality, occasionally a black comedy, and a horror story as bleak and blood-soaked as Night of the Living Dead, but with fewer zombies. And containing several of the most famous passages in the English language, from mere sentences like neither a borrower or a lender be, or something is rotten on the state of Denmark, or frailty thy name is woman, to full-length speeches, like that one about being or not, or whatever. If it didn't deserve its place as one of the most famous fictions in history, frankly, after 500 years, it wouldn't still have it. And obviously, being that old, that good, and that famous, means that a lot of it has been internalised by the mass consciousness in general. Even people who don't otherwise know the first thing about it know there's a bit where Piglet talks to a skull called Yorick, or that he says the phrase to be or not to be, or just generally that he's a miserable bastard with a dead dad. Or even just as much as there's a skull and a ghost and some sword fighting. That's plenty of semiotic material for advertising to work with. In truth, Piglet's main use is as shorthand for Shakespeare himself. Like I said, it's his most famous work, iconic within an icon. You could even nest it up another layer. After all, old Wild Bill is in many ways a symbolic shorthand in himself for the concept and the medium of theatre. Like this, you see.
Whether 'tis nobler in mind to suffer slings and hammers of outrageous Yorkshire, or
Yorkshire ham. Get it? Ham actor with a Yorkshire accent. Tesco in their whimsical period, let's say, circa 1990. Stupid as all get out, but I'd for one prefer it to patronising rebuses and nursery rhymes about how great the British people are. I don't want to cuddle you, I just want to buy some biscuits off you. It's definitely funnier than this as well. Anyway, there's no specific reason the ham is reciting to be or not to be, or indeed dressed the way he is. He could as easily be reciting from Death of a Salesman, or Edward Bond's Saved. But that wouldn't have worked nearly as well if it didn't fail outright. Advertising is about putting specific ideas in people's minds as quickly as possible, and most ideas are reached via other ideas, like an A to Z map. The quickest route to theatre is Shakespeare, and the quickest route to Shakespeare is Piglet. I'm sure if they'd had more time they'd have explored the whole pig meat pun angle as well, but they didn't. So they didn't. So that's a relatively straightforward treatment of this concept. Here's one that isn't.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
Yes, it's an advert for this car, and yes, it's suggesting features that I don't think the actual product can actually live up to.
Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them.
A Kit 1000 with the voice of what sounds like Alec Baldwin in 1993 during a recession. While it's a neat extra, I'm not sure what use the ability to perform Hamlet is actually going to be in a family roadster, compared to, say, a boot that can store up to 5 bulging Sainsbury's carrier bags.
Before you buy a car, you should see how well it performs. Blazer from Chrysler Plymouth.
While it's ultimately making more of a fuss about it, this advert's using Piglet the same way the Tesco one did, as shorthand for theatre in support of a pun on the word performance, so lame that it really shows up the amount of effort that was wasted here. The entire Plymouth Laser line died a death within a year. I don't think this advert is why, but it obviously didn't help any.
Chrysler Plymouth.
I would like to thank my biggest fans, Car and Driver, Road and Trap.
Adverts more specific to Piglet himself, of course, tend to concentrate on the 2 most famous passages, both monologues by the title character contemplating mortality from slightly different directions. The second most famous involves him gawping at a skull that he used to know and it has skin on and a brain and a person underneath, obliquely considering the fact that everything he ever did has led merely to this, because it's a famously cheerful play.
Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And now, how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it.
That gets played on a lot, possibly more than the other one, which I will get to, don't worry. Because with the skull and everything, it's more visual, not to mention simple. Give a character a skull and probably some puffy-sleeved Tudor-type costume. All you need after that is to tie it together somehow, which can be as flimsy as this.
Alas, poor Yorick. Never used Super Avalon videotape from TDK, the great name in tape cassettes.
You may have noticed that none of these elements have anything to do with each other, but it's memorable, right? And it actually did make a non-zero amount of sense in context.
There are those among us who will use inferior video cassettes to watch their favourite programs. But then again,
because the one and only truly original Pink Panther, backed with the legendary Michael Hordern, was the ongoing star of TDK's advertising at the time, along with the Inspector, all animated by Richard Williams, naturally. As you can see, the Piglet impression was just one of the identities, or more accurately dressing up games, that the puce gentleman, scholar and acrobat went through in this campaign. Like the car, it's being done purely for the sake of the reference, because references stick in the mind, and that's the goal of advertising.
tape from TDK, the great name in tape cassettes.
Carling Black Label did a more extensive version of what in many ways amounts to the same thing.
Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him. Oh no!
This is more closely tied in with the product, although that's not hard. I don't just mean in the use of the catchphrase at the end, I mean in what it's trying to say about the product in question.
My noble Lord Hamlet. Over here, son. On me head. I bet he drinks Carling Black Label.
Because this is clearly playing on Shakespeare's image as being, well, dull. And to be fair, he did have his moments, and some of them are in Hamlet, although the precise number depends on the production, of course. The product in question here, however, Carling Black Label Lager Beer, is associated with fun and irreverence. So you've got your thematic conflict, if you like. Add in the already famous tagline and the rest writes itself. Dull thing shattered by fun thing. By fun thing, it broke dull thing. It also represents an early appearance in one of these adverts from Mark Arden. One half with Steve Frost of the Oblivion Boys duo, who would eventually come to front this campaign until 1991 or so. Even Wild Bill himself gets a cameo.
I bet he drinks Carling Black Label.
Your best bet for a fuller flavour. Carling Black Label.
Obviously the most famous bit in Piglet, and one of the most iconic pieces of art in the history of mankind, is his soliloquy in Act 3, Scene 1.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune,
or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end.
Just as with Yorick later on, he's contemplating mortality, except this time from the other side, brooding on life, how easy it is to end it, how irreversible that decision would be, and how unknowable the consequences. Unsurprisingly, when it's quoted for advertising, they don't usually go into that. Besides, as I've already explained, there's a fairly obvious reason why that Carling advert used the Yorick bit instead. It's essentially the same reason I'm using it right now in front of your actual face. The Yorick bit has props, a gravestone and a scallywag. The other bit might be even more famous and iconic, but it has no associated visual cues whatsoever. Just that miserable Danish kid. Okay, technically Ophelia is supposed to be sitting around in the background reading a book, but everyone forgets that. For all intents and purposes, it's just Piglet himself babbling on. And he's not even talking to anyone except himself and or the fourth wall. Then again, who cares? This is advertising. And unless you're trying to sell existential despair, and very few people are, the actual content doesn't matter. It's all about image. To be or not to be is the centre of a Matryoshka doll of shorthands. For Hamlet, for Shakespeare, for theatre, for art, and for cleverness in general. The Tesco advert with the Yorkshire ham used the first three of those. This advert for Oxford University uses all five in infuriatingly smug fashion. No, it is one question, you smarmy fuck-knuckles. A choice between two things amounts to a great bloody university my arse.
That's right. Oxford's a complete dump.
9 times out of 10, of course, a famous quotation of any sort is an occasion for puns. Like this from Stella Artois. Or this one, which is frankly disgusting. Or this, rather clever one, if maybe slightly patronising. Oh, you kids with your computers and your hula hoops and Or the obligatory pencil advert. This one comes from before the age of COVID. There's even a Poncian and Thou fragrance in a skull-shaped bottle. If you had a time machine, it would take days just explaining that one to Shakespeare. But that's what happens when art is just that good. It happened to the Mona Lisa. It even happened to Jaws. You become famous in your own right. You become part of the mental lexicon. And while you don't necessarily lose all meaning, you do become separated from it. You become an abstraction. A set of amygdala-sparking cues. Against death and all oblivious enmity shall you pace forth. Your praise shall still find room, even in the eyes of all posterity that wear this world out to the ending doom. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this. This gives life to thee. You just sat through a Bob the Fish production. Nice! If you haven't already, you absolutely must check out bobthefish.org.uk. Literally hundreds more videos not unlike that one, adding up to days worth of entertainment and all absolutely free. But if you're not a cold-hearted skinflint, you can always support us on Patreon. For as little as anything at all, you can make programs like the one you just watched possible in the first place, and become eligible for bonus material such as glimpses of the book I'm writing about the BBC, monthly riffings on random commercial breaks, the complete archives of the angry political satire magazine Two Sons, and even the odd very occasional bonus video essay unavailable anywhere else. If nothing else, you should prevent me from starving and or freezing to death in the foreseeable future, so that'll be nice. No pressure or anything. bobthefish.org.uk. You make it what it is.